Problem because we don't have Chewy this week to do the amazing intro, so I'm going to have to do the best I can, which is not going to be great. All right. So you know how all those people on the internet can real snide? You remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to try to be Snyder. I think I got it right. Chewy does it so much better than me. Hi and welcome Behind the Hype. With me, your host, is always Brian Dressel. And with me, as always, is Jonathan Hardesty.
Snyder.
I tried. So Chewy has been so fortunate to get her Moderna shot, number 2, which means she will not be joining us tonight. Side effects kind of kicking her ass. And as much as she wants to be here to talk about how much she legitimately enjoys this movie, I think sleep is kind of winning that argument. So she will not be joining us tonight. But her review on the movie was pretty good. She didn't like the pacing. That was it. I'm sure she'd have 10,000 more things to say if she were able to join us today, but unfortunately she can't. So I'll give you the baseline of liked it, wish it was better.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's kind of a fair review for the movie. John and I actually met up at a park and saw each other in person. I know, so strange. The other day, and even when I was telling him about it, I'm like, this is so clearly in need of a Snyder Cut. It's kind of a bummer that we don't have one on this one.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, I think it might be one of the, maybe with the exception of Man of Steel, it might be one of the only ones that doesn't have an actual director's cut, even hinted at, suggested, or even in existence or rumored.
Yeah, you might be right, now that I'm thinking about it. Because I always thought there'd be one of Man of Steel, but he always says there isn't, and I'm like, I don't believe you.
Yeah, he claims Man of Steel is his full vision for it, and it's like, yeah, sure, yep, sure,
like,
yep.
Like, we're not doing that this month because we've done it before, and I've fucking seen it so many times. I'm a big fan of Cavill's Superman, and I'm a big fan of that movie, but it doesn't feel like a whole movie. It's never felt like a whole movie. That's been my biggest problem with it since day one. So I don't believe you. And if it is, then okay. Then maybe that's just not my favorite Snyder film, and that's okay too. But Owls of Ga'Hoole,
Right. Or rather, Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole.
I fucking hate the title so much. Oh my god! Speaking of titles you don't like, did you see Chris Terrio announced the titles that he went for Batman vs Superman? If you didn't, look them up. I don't think I've agreed with Warner Brothers on fucking anything, but Chris Terrio's titles, they were not the right choice. It's like Son of Sun versus Night of Night. Like no.
No. That's a no.
Nope.
Like, yeah, no. Much respect to writers, because those titles sound good in your head, and I believe it. Like, but once you put that on paper and then you read it out loud, you're like, no.
It's just,
no.
Yeah,
Son of Sun and Night. Okay, no.
Nope.
Yeah.
All right, back to Owls of Ga'Hoole, the other terribly title. I'm just gonna be calling it the Owls of Ga'Hoole the rest of the episode because that's too long of a fucking title.
Yeah.
So this movie, do you want to do a really quick breakdown? I think I did the other one.
Sure. Yeah, I can give it a shot. Because there's a lot to it.
A lot to it.
Yeah. So in short, there's two brothers, two owls, barn owls, I think, Soren and Clud, and they're they're two different sides of the coin, I guess, in terms of their mentality, but they get kidnapped by a bunch of owls called the what was it? The Pure Ones?
The Pure Ones? Yes.
Yeah, and they get indoctrinated into their way, or start to, but Soren escapes with another little owl in tow. And I just don't remember any of these names, so sorry.
No, not a single one.
Yeah, little owl. They escape with the help of another owl who's defecting or trying to find his family, and then they meet up with the Guardians after a journey, and they try to warn him of what's happening because there's this evil owl called Metalbeak.
Sick name.
Yeah, Metalbeak. I'm into it, I guess, but
I'm here for it. I like that one.
Yeah. And so then they warn about it, but they don't believe them, so they send scouts over to the Pure Ones, and they get ambushed, and only one returns, and he's like, oh, it was so true, we must go fight. And so they do, but it's a trap, and Soren has to go back and save the day. But meanwhile, his brother has been indoctrinated by Metalbeak, and they fight, and Clud, the now evil brother, quote-unquote dies, or supposedly dies, and they win the day, and they become guardians of Ga'Hoole, and it's happy, and everything's all good. But there's a hint that maybe he's out there still, Clud, the new Metalbeak, or something. I mean, and yeah, sequels!
Yeah, that definitely never happened.
Yeah.
This is one of the only ones that I can say that we're covering throughout these 5 weeks that I'm like, this one not having an audience, I can't say I'm that surprised. It's very like Secret of Nim level, like, yeah, it's a kid's movie, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like, if you want your kids to be real fucking bummed out, it's a kid's movie. Which is fine. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I'm here for those movies. I think there's nothing against having like hard-hitting movies for kids. It's just like something felt off about this movie the whole way through to me.
Yeah, and I almost brought it up to you in chat before this, but I didn't want to kind of spoil the thought. But this seems to be a problem with adaptations of book series, and we had a recent thing we did that was a YA adaptation of a book series that we had I have a lot of the same complaints.
You're referring to the fuck, what the hell is that thing called? That was another stupidly titled one, wasn't it?
Mortal Engines?
Yes.
And so then I was talking with Jandy about this a lot in terms of adaptations in general. And what this feels like is that on some level they knew that there was only going to be one movie. And so this first movie is the first 3 books. Because I had to know. I had to know if this was the same situation of most adaptations for these types of stories. And yeah, this movie is the first 3 books. So we're getting 3 books of story about these owls of Ga'Hoole in like one movie. So the whole thing with Metalbeak happens over time, over the other books, and it all kind of comes together.
Oh,
it's like a huge saga. It's like, don't quote me on this, but like 12 to 13 books. It's a lot of books. So we're only getting like the first 3 of them in this movie. And once I read that in my research, it made a lot of sense. Everything about this made sense. The terminology, the fantasy terminology that was hitting us rapid fire, all the names that we're never going to remember. And then the pace that felt breakneck, yet not like that felt breakneck, but at the same time it was long. This movie's long.
It's a long hour and a half, and I don't mean that as a joke. Like you feel every minute of that hour and a half.
Yeah, I think I paused it at one point just to look up something who the voice actors were, because almost all of them sounded like Hugo Weaving at one point or another.
They either all sound like Hugo Weaving to me, or they all sounded like Elijah Wood, who's not in the movie.
Right? Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I had some issues. Also, like one of them, Soren sounded like Jamie Bell a lot, and I had to double check that. But when I did, I paused it. I was only halfway through the movie, and I'm like, holy balls! This felt like I already watched an hour and a half.
Yeah, oh yeah, I had 2 of those moments. The first time I think it was about 20 minutes in. I'm like, so we got to be about almost an hour into this. Oh god damn! Like,
yeah,
wow. And like this movie just wasn't very economical with like what it felt it could lose from the books. Like, granted, I haven't read a word of the books. Like, I should be honest about that. But at the same time, like, this movie spends what feels like a solid chunk of screen time teaching the owls how to fly. And it's I get
it never really gets the chance to pay off either, because
they just fucking learn to fly. Okay. I assume owls can fly. Like, I can make that leap that between being born and being a fucking owl, it learned to fly. I didn't need to spend that much time with it, especially because, like you said, it doesn't pay off. Once they learn to fly, they're good. They're flying as far as they can. Like, the what would it be, like, the stamina of flight isn't a fucking problem. You just had to learn the physicality of it. So it's like, this doesn't really work for me. Like, why would you keep this entire like plot line in here? It really does not. The only reason it's there and the only reason it works is like, oh, if they knew how to fly, they wouldn't have gotten kidnapped. It's like, okay, I feel like there's another way to write around that without wasting all the flight time. But
well, right, and so there's all this stuff that's just set up because it has to be, and that kind of boils down to the whole adaptation aspect of it, that these things in this, everything I saw on screen felt like it had to be there because it was in the books in some way, whether or not it worked or made sense or paid off. Specifically, yeah, like you said, the flight, the branching, they spend a long time on that, and the stealthiness of branching, we never deal with that. Their fight, Clud and Soren's fight at the end, doesn't have anything to do with that other than they reach a tree and they're fighting each other at a tree that's similar to what they grew up in. So it's like, okay, but the movie doesn't have enough time to make that have any meaning. Like, it's almost like you get someone who would actually spend time on that. You get a filmmaker like Zack Snyder who could do that and who has the visual prowess and the style to be able to pull this sort of thing off and let the visuals communicate all this stuff. And you see it happen on screen every now and then. But there's just so much data that has to be presented to us in adaptation form for the fans that it's just completely alienating to anyone else who's not. And if you change too much, like, it becomes a problem of who you're making it for. And if you're just making it for the fans, I don't know if there were enough. So it seemed like a very weird proposition, this movie, as I'm watching it.
A very, very small needle to thread. And I can't say if he got there or not. I honestly, I don't know a single fan of the book series. Like, I don't know anyone who's like, yeah, man, give me my fucking owls. Like, it's just not something that happens, at least in my circles. I'm sure the fans are out there, or Warner Brothers would have never made the fucking thing.
Well, right. And I think it's because I have my daughter's 8 years old, so she's starting to get into these types of books. So going through like the Little House series, reading book series, even starting to read like the Tintin graphic novels. And just, so she's getting into that mode around 8, 9 years old of book series. And that's kind of what the age range was suggested for this Owls of Ga'Hoole book series, around 9, 10 years old. So it's like, that's the audience for this, is the 9 to 10-year-old. So the darkness isn't a problem. The violence isn't a problem. Even the books are violent from what I've read on reviews and things like that. But it's just that they're going to respond more to a good adaptation versus all the details. Like, you try to put a bunch of details in there for nerds.
Yeah, totally. Like, that's what those are there for. But in this situation, it's like, wait, who are the nerds? Are they people who actually care about this? Mm-hmm. Or not? Because, like, you look at other Snyder interpretations or adaptations or whatever you want to call them, because I think both words kind of apply here, and you go to like the BVS or Justice League stuff, and it's like, now this is just taking source material and making his own thing out of it. It's something that we have been a very big fan of from day one in this podcast. But then you look at like Watchmen, and Watchmen is far more like, I'm going to use the book as storyboards for the movie. And granted, he took a lot of liberties, he changed a lot of things, but when you look at that movie, it is undeniably Watchmen. So I'm not sure what school of thought he was going after for this thing, and it kind of feels to me, and now correct me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree, this felt to me like Snyder was doing his best to bring like all of the tricks in his tool bag. Like, he's got his slow-mo, he's got like his camera work, he's got the music score, the way he like has characters interact with each other. Like, all of his tropes are in this movie. They just don't seem to work as well here. Like, it's not the medium for them.
Yeah, even down to the pop songs, which in general I like Owl City. They use that a bunch.
I just kind of have to call bullshit on hiring Owl City for your movie about owls.
Yeah.
Like, little too easy, guys.
No, it is a low-hanging fruit, to be sure, for deciding it. But at the same time, like, they have a good sound, right? So it's like, oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. I mean, it's good music. You're right there. I'm just like, come on, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I think even Wreck-It Ralph used Owl City for a little bit, too. So, like, they have a bop that I think works in terms of a younger audience. So, heart's in the right place. Maybe the joke of the choice is not, but...
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how long did you spend looking for a band? I just Googled owls and bands, and I got the first one.
Right. Because even then, the childish bop of their sound doesn't work here. Like,
no, it's really at odds with the movie. Like, it's a good song, but it just doesn't fit at all.
In a movie or in a thing here that has owls with swords in their talons and metallic talons slicing at each other, and a villain whose beak has been torn off and has to wear a metallic mask that looks almost like a wraith from Lord of the Rings when he looks at you and his eyes all garbled and yellow and vile.
Oh, I kept thinking of the things from Dark Crystal.
Okay.
Same look though. Like, we're on the same page for sure.
Yeah, and it's like there's a frightening element to it, a more demonic look. And it's like, yeah, and then you cut to, you know, Owl City, and they're like, ooh, ooh, ah, and then pixelated warbling music soundtrack. It's weird. It's a weird choice and at odds. But that's the thing that Snyder will do, is bring in pop songs in a very interesting way and recontextualizing way. And it's like, well, yeah, you guys got a director who is great at this stuff, but you shouldn't have got him for your movie.
Yeah, like, it's just like it'd be like watching Stanley Kubrick direct Iron Man. Like, yeah, I'd be super into watching it. I don't think it'd be a very good Iron Man movie, though.
No.
And that's fine. That's what I kind of like this movie for that. Like, it's a really cool, like, well, look at this experiment. Did it work? Nah, not really. But it's really kind of interesting when it does work, though. Like, for example, my best one will be when God, what the fuck is his name? Soren. When Soren's learning how to like fly through the wind, and like he learns how to like tunnel the rain, and like how to actually use the rain to push himself further, and like the slow-mo works there. Like, it does that exact thing that we really enjoyed in like Dawn of the Dead and Sucker Punch, and obviously next week's in BVS and Justice League, where like the slow-mo made the scene better. Like, it made you focus on what was important. It made you feel like that moment with him where it's like, oh, this works now. Like, he is just one with the wind, and it's like, oh yeah, and then it comes back later when he has to do the same thing, but now in fire, and it's way more important. I'm like, this works. This is what I like about Zack Snyder. I just don't have more than like that one example in this movie, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah, and even the soundtrack does the right thing there, because there's a song in there, and I recognize the song from something, but I'd have to spend more time to figure out where. But I've heard it before in another medium, like in another way, and so just to hear that, you know, pitch shifted, changed, different vocals, but with the owl as he's going through the tunnel, I was like, I'm in this moment. Suddenly, I'm here, and but then, you know, once it's all done, I couldn't tell you which one was Clud and which one was Soren for maybe the first half of the movie.
If it wasn't for the fact of how easily Clud was taken over to the quote-unquote dark side, I would never remember. But, like, Clud is just like, hey, do you want to be a bad guy? Yeah, all right. And that's it. It's like, what? Like, can we have a little more character development here? Nah. No, we got things to do. We're so far past that now.
Right, yeah. And it felt like a deja vu with this, especially compared to our Mortal Engines episode, because so many of the problems and so many of the things that we enjoyed happened at around the same time. Like, these things that we liked about Mortal Engines, the filmmaker things, the visuals are all great. The soundtrack and times are really good. There's a moment we can look to that has a very standout thing, and then it just becomes incomprehensible all around it.
It's really fun. Like, the more we're talking about this, more I'm like, why do we ever bother watching these adaptations? I don't think you and I have ever enjoyed one of them.
I feel like I hold out hope, because on the opposite end of this, you have Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah,
that did it right. You know, that enough people in the world could sit down and be like, yeah, I agree, that's actually really well. And then, like, he also, on the flip side of that, has the opposite problem where he has a small book that he blows out, for The Hobbit, and it gets all over the place. But still, the point is, like, we have these ways that they've been done right, and people kind of hit the mark. So, like, even with this one, even with Owls of Ga'Hoole, there were a lot of moments where it was like, I kind of get what you're going for. I'm kind of into this. And they're fleeting, you know, like Trinity breaching the clouds at the end of the third Matrix movie. You're like, there's hope, and then back down into the muck.
Yeah. One good moment in a 2.5-hour nonsense pile. It's a great moment, though.
Right. And even with all these movies, there's always this sense of like, oh, we liked all these things. So that's why we continue to come across these and watch them and give them the chance that we do, because there's A, hope, but also B, there's something there still. There's always something there. There's always some idea, some visual, some piece of the puzzle that just really works. And it's kind of like the come back, you know, I'm changed. I'll be different. This one will be different. And it's like, well, no, but sorta.
And it's always interesting when it's like a filmmaker that you really enjoy. Like, I know you're coming around to Snyder. You might not be quite where I'm at, but you're definitely coming around. But like, you watch these sorts of movies, and it's like, I love seeing what I love about you in this movie. Like, I love being able to pick out, like, Snyder got his way in that argument. And like, oh, yep, that's him right there. But there's also kind of like this heartbreaking thing of like, look, I'm a huge Snyder fan, so don't, whatever. But the man needs more than an hour and a half to tell a story. Like, I think we can all agree, like, he works his best when he's over 3 hours. So when you see this movie here that is this, like, huge, sweeping, owl-filled epic, itty bitty living space, like,
right,
it's not going to work. Like, you can just look at the numbers and just the math doesn't add up. Like, nope, that's not going to be a great movie. Like, it'll be as good as it can be, but if Snyder had the right tools, the right leeway, basically the freedom to make the movie that we all know he can make when he has freedom, I think this movie would have been great. Like, I think this one really could have, like, crossed that nerd divide of, like, well, only fans of this will enjoy this. I don't think that had to be the case here. I think there's enough here. There's enough world building here. There's clearly a wonderful design here. Like, the owls, the way they use weapons, the way they use, like, the metal talon things, like, all this shit is really cool. Like, I am so into it. I just wish the story was at all either comprehensible, like, so I could understand what the fuck is going on, or when I do understand what's going on, I wish I cared. But since everything moves so fast, I'm either confused or I'm checked out.
Yeah, and again, there's kind of this issue, and I'm always back and forth on it. I have not decided how I feel, but with something like this, you almost have to have this movie made this way because of the chance that you won't get another one.
Sure.
So by nature, you're already forced into this bubble of like, we have to sacrifice comprehensibility to just get as much as we can, and maybe if there's a sequel, we can slow down. And I think these movies never get that. They're never allowed that chance. So then the other side of that is, well, if this movie had just been set up with an exciting hook of a future of a potential metal beak, he's hinted at, he's rumored, and suddenly that's the hook for the next one. Or, you get to a third part, you have 3 movies instead of 1. Like, financially, you're never going to get that chance, but that would have changed everything. Suddenly, now your hour and a half for Zack Snyder can work because he can embellish the plot that's smaller, and build it more like a symphony versus a jam session.
An Owl City song.
Right.
But yeah, no, you're right. I think there is definitely a way to approach this film with this filmmaker, with this filmmaking team, everybody, to where it didn't end up like this. And I say like this, like it's a bad movie. It's definitely not a bad film. Like I've watched worse kids movies. I've watched scarier kids movies. I've watched more violent kids movies. Like everything this movie does that people are kind of like, I don't know. I'm like, I've seen worse. But I've also seen better. And that's kind of the problem.
Yeah. And yeah, again, the thing we come across with Snyder on this is the time, like the runtime. We say that he needs to have a long runtime, which then begs the question of, like, well, it's a kids movie. Kids movies cannot be the 3-hour epics. You can't really get away with that with 9 to 10-year-olds.
No,
because the attention span. So you already have that as an issue. But the way he told this movie, and why we enjoyed it as much as we did, is he told it very visually too. Everything was so visually powerful, even if we couldn't figure out who was who, what was what stealth on branches means, like why the parents were gone for most of the movie and weren't just looking, like all these things. Like you're
like why the hell did Claude flip sides so fast? Like it really was that easy. I'm not exaggerating. This is like Darth Vader levels of like, you should be evil. Okay.
Yeah, and then when they finally argue, it's like, well, they accepted me. Like, really? You guys talked for 2 minutes.
Yeah, and we didn't really see you not accepted before. Like, we didn't really get that buildup of like, oh, you're the unwanted son. We never really got that.
Yeah, and then another unfortunate kind of victim of this pacing is the moon blinking, which to me stood out as a very interesting idea and one that really begged for a lot more time.
Oh my God, yes. Or I wouldn't have been making fun of it for the past 11 years.
Right? And because there's a lot of interesting things in there. And the power of the moon and seasons, like this is stuff that's in a part 1. This is in your Fellowship of the Ring. You build all this stuff up. Like, you can't know that the journey is going to take such a toll on Frodo without living in his idyllic lifestyle for 30, 40 minutes? And
I mean, arguably maybe a little too long sometimes, but I mean, also definitely not. Because it's great. But it's like you said. But like the moon blinking, like what the fuck is that? Actually asking, what the fuck is that? Like we're giving no explanation. What we see is a bunch of little owls being told to look up the sky. They do, and now they're slaves. Like, how does that not happen to all owls? How is this not like a thing? It's like, don't look at the moon. It's like with kids, don't look in the sun or you'll lose your eyes. Don't look at the moon or you'll lose your sanity. Like,
yeah,
is this common? Like, you're only awake at night. The moon seems super dangerous.
Yeah, is it a weird, like, the rules aren't clear, and they can't be. They're not allowed to be with the restraints that we've already talked about. But this moon blinking thing is a pause moment where it's like, if I'm confused by this, like, I want to know if it's important. Because it feels important. This thing, moon blinking, the rules of it, why Egglethane, Egg, the little cutesy one, owl baby Yoda, like how she recovers from it, like what makes her able to recover from it, and wouldn't everyone else just recover from it?
Yeah. Also, like that didn't seem that hard. She just kind of waited it out.
Yeah, and so then, but then on the same, like on that, like the next door neighbor of this is why are they going through owl pellets to find weird wispy things? But again, no time. We don't have any time for that. No. It's just elemental. It weakens owls. It hits them in their gizzard. What's the role of the gizzard? They talk about gizzards, and like, I know from birds in general, and you research animals in general, you understand this. But like, there's a fantasy version of gizzards here. Gizzards are spiritual.
Yeah, they say feel it in your gizzard. It's like, okay, so what?
Yeah, and it's tied into that special move he does through the tunnels. Like, you feel it in your gizzard. Soren's decisions are made by his gizzard. And once you get through about a dozen uses of that, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Sort of like when they have to get past the Gahunamine Sea or whatever. Like, at a certain point, there's a level of disbelief and confusion that you just stop paying attention to those things because it's gobbledygook, right?
Yeah, but it's like, say, for example, you had a less accomplished director doing Harry Potter. Now, Harry Potter has its own plethora of problems nowadays, so it's not always the best example. But you look at the very first film, out the door, Dumbledore walks up to McGonagall and starts talking about muggles and magic and just spouting all this magic word nonsense at you. But since they spend the time, they explain the terms, you're never that confused by it. By the end of the first movie, somebody says muggle, you're not questioning it. You're like, oh, that's somebody who doesn't know magic, who is not capable of doing magic. You got it, right? You figured it out. Yeah. This movie, since it moves so fast, it's not very, like, as I said in the very beginning of the episode, not very economical when it's time. It skips these things, and it leads us to going where you're going of like, well, you just kind of stop paying attention to it because it doesn't make sense. And then when you only have an hour and a half of a movie and you're already just checking out for chunks, like, we're in trouble. Like, you're in a bad state.
Right. And that's where it kind of comes down to, because for this whole month, largely we're talking about Zack Snyder's style in general and his visual vision for movies and how he presents them and their presentation. And that should be a key feature here. But like, why are we checking out of a Zack Snyder movie? Like, why? Yeah, why do we have to check out of that? Because I'm looking at my phone 2/3 of the way through this because I'm like, oh, maybe I can check Twitter, because like while I wait for something big to happen that's explosive.
But yeah, so I totally agree. Like, there's no reason while watching a Zack Snyder film that you should be like pulling out your laptop. Like, that used to be the key phrase that me and a good friend of mine used to have. Like, when we'd ask, like, hey, I watched this movie over the weekend. How good was it? I pulled the laptop out about halfway through. Like, it was a good way of saying, like, I didn't turn it off, but I wasn't into it. And this is, out of the entire 5 weeks of this month, the only movie that ticks that box for me. Like, I might say some mean things about Sucker Punch, but at the end of the day, I enjoy the movie. This one, it's not that I don't enjoy it. It's that it does so little for me to enjoy. Like, the stuff that's there, I think is great. I think it's great. It's pure Zack Snyder, and I mean that in a good way, because it is the slow-mo that works, the music cues that work, the character stuff that works. It's all there. But But when it's not doing that stuff, and it does that stuff so infrequently, the movie is, by and large, if you're not a fan of the property, skippable. And you kind of, that feels so at odds with Zack Snyder, because Zack Snyder is the director that I'll go, he might have made the worst movie of the year, and I'm still going to go see it in theaters because you know it's going to be packed to the brim with style and something you haven't seen before. You might end up hating it, but I'll still take the worst movie that does something new over the best movie that does the same thing over and over again. And that is Zack Snyder almost every time. This would be that almost. This wasn't that time. This was so,
Yeah.
I don't want to say paint by numbers because that's way too mean of an insult, but it feels bland. And that's not a word I can use to describe Zack Snyder in any other scenario.
Well, and I just took a look, and what's interesting, perhaps, and I don't know if this is true across all his movies, but this is out of this month. Dawn of the Dead had a different writer, but there were two different writers credited as for screenplay for this, and judging by how he worked with James Gunn in Dawn of the Dead and how he worked with the writers here, for better or worse, it was a mismatch, and it was because they just weren't in sync. And whether that's because the scripts were just handed off to him to work with and he just directed from there, or due to the nature of animation, CG animation and animation in general, it's more of a more amorphous thing. It's hard to say. But at the same time, it's like, well, that's a pinpoint to what you just said. Like, we've got his style, but he's not being helped with it. Whereas with BVS in the future here and Justice League, that's all him. And Sucker Punch is all him. And when it's all him, you have to pay attention to his movies. Like, all the way through, even though he's derided for style over substance. It's just like, no, he's layered it in like a cake or a souffle. I don't know cooking very well, but he's layered these things in there, so they're there if you're going to look for them, but you have to pay attention. This you can't pay attention.
I could be wrong, but I think this is the only movie this month, maybe not Dawn of the Dead, but he's usually a producer on his own films too, and he's not a producer on this one. His wife is, Deborah's on there, but she's only on as executive producer, which, God, I've been in the film industry for going on 15 years, and I still can't tell you the difference between all the producers. So take that for what you will. So maybe it just wasn't enough Snyder in this movie. Maybe it was more studio. Maybe Snyder sat down and thought this would be a great opportunity and a wonderful experiment, and then about halfway through, he's like, whoa, animation's not for me. Like, that's a very real possibility, because animation, if you're not aware, I mean, there's a documentary out there that I still haven't seen, that John has mentioned a lot of times. There's a lot of things out there that you can look into the fucking hurricane that is the animation world. It's a totally different beast. So
and just even as a brief snippet, like, you can be close to theatrical release and still be working out some plot details. At least that's in the documentary I'm talking about. They had that where it was like, oh, we're about a couple months away. We haven't locked a certain song. And it's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, like
so like the nature of animation is all at once very specific in every single way, but it's also changes all the time.
Yeah, and I mean that is very Zack Snyder. I mean, Zack Snyder has even said that, like, he would do a new cut of Sucker Punch if he could. Like, he is in that school of thought, so it does, argumentally, like, on paper, it would make sense that animation could work for him. And I just unfortunately don't think either animation just doesn't work for him, or maybe this was just the wrong project to get him started on.
Yeah, and I feel like getting powerful filmmakers with a very specific style that are known for defining works, putting them in something that is a series, supposed to be a series of movies, a franchise starter in this particular way, for an audience that's not in their general wheelhouse, seems so far from all the movies we've reviewed a guaranteed miss.
Yeah. So I'm willing to chalk this movie up as what I think it mostly is, which is just a delightful experiment. I don't regret watching it the 2 times I've seen it. If Corin ever wants to watch the Owl movie, I'll never tell him no. Like, it's not a bad movie. I think out of all the 5 movies that we're doing this month, this will be the one that I return to the least. Would be my bet. And I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. Like, I'd still probably give it like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. It's still good enough. I think on Metacritic it ended up in the 50s somewhere, which I think seems about right. It's kind of like what we said earlier. Like, it's not bad. I wish it was better.
Yeah. And it's just in a month where we're dealing with a lot of the Snyder problem, as some people might call it. It's a very weird aberration in his filmography.
Yeah, it is. And like, this isn't how these movies came out, but as far as for our podcast goes, it is kind of interesting that we did, like, the pre-comic book Snyder and took a little break and went crazy with owls, and now we're going full comic book Snyder.
Right. We're kind of the three before the big ones have a very specific journey in mind, because you can see it, like the first one establishing, the second one, his own thing. And even though the order might be off, but in terms of how we've addressed them,
Yeah.
we've got his beginning, his own project, and one that is for the studio. This feels very for the studio.
Oh, yeah.
From the beginning, and it's this machine YA style, like franchise starters. So then after that, we're gonna just dive off the deep end into here's my vision, take it.
I mean, I'm very excited for what comes next, personally. I think all of us here are, though. The next two movies are pretty fucking good.
Yeah, I've certainly come around on these next films coming up in interesting ways, and there's a big journey to those. These two movies coming up are why we even suggested this month.
Yep.
Is because, like, I need to rethink this. Had it just been this movie, maybe not. Had we started with this, I might have been like, I've made a mistake.
I mean, we could have just done like his first. No, we already did. Like, that's the thing, is, like, I look at Zack Snyder, I'm like, we've covered like all of his movies. I'm a fan. I mean, I guess we could do Watchmen. I don't think we ever actually covered Watchmen on the show. That one was kind of like my, I want to do it, I don't want to do it, I don't know.
That one is an interesting thing, and also it's not helped by the fact that you have to own the director's cut. You can't like rent it, and
which is weird, because like it pops up on streaming every now and then. Like, it was on Amazon Prime, both the theatrical cut, director's cut with the animated video intercut. All three of them were there for like a year, and now they're all gone. You can't even rent them again. It's like, what the fuck is happening with this thing?
Yeah,
no, it's all gonna be on HBO Max later this year. I mean, that would be nice.
Yeah, here's hoping, because then I'll give it a chance, because I imagine, apart from this movie, the trajectory will match with the other ones in terms of, oh, I see what he's going for. This is why I didn't like the theater version.
I remember this is going way back in the day, back to like when I still followed IGN. Like, there's an interview with a woman on IGN who, she's like, oh yeah, then Watchmen, that terrible movie. And somebody just like, that's not a terrible movie. She's like, I should clarify. The theatrical cut was terrible. When I finally saw the director's cut, had I only seen the director's cut, I would have said Watchmen's a good movie. But I always just remember the theatrical one. I'm like, that's going back all the way before the Superman, Batman nonsense. Like, that was like, this has been a thing for a while.
Yeah. And it just kind of gummies the works in terms of the discourse on it.
Which really does.
Which is probably good that this has fallen under the radar, the Owls one, because it wouldn't help his case necessarily.
Nah.
And I feel like, and I also feel, I mean, I guess I feel fortunate that it hasn't fed the fodder, because to the movie's detriment, it's not enough Snyder to annoy people, and not enough Snyder to mock.
Yeah, there's really nothing to mock here. Like, even most people who aren't Snyder fans will still say like, "Oh, that one wasn't bad." And it's like that speaks volumes. When people who hate Zack Snyder say The Owls Look at Who is his best movie, what you're saying is, I hate Zack Snyder, because there's so little Zack Snyder in this movie.
Right. It's like, oh, what a filmmaker negging, right?
Yeah. It'd be like saying your favorite Fast and the Furious movie with Paul Walker in it is Fast and Furious 3. The joke there is he's not in 3. If you didn't get that, God, everyone needs to watch fucking Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah, but I feel like, yeah, we've almost even reached a terminus here for this, because
I think
even the voice acting, it's good, but like we joked earlier, I couldn't tell you which one was Hugo Weaving without looking it up, and even then they put the name next to it, and I'm like, who?
I was
sorry, Al joke.
When I said Elijah Wood earlier, I wasn't. That was a terrible Al joke. When Kind of everybody's pretty good. But I wasn't joking when I said earlier when I thought it was Elijah Wood. I was halfway through the movie. I'm like, why is Elijah Wood so whiny in this? Oh, it's Jim Sturgis because it's not Elijah Wood. Sorry, Jim. My bad. You're great in this.
Right. And like even Jeffrey Rush is in this, and you're like, oh wait, which one was he? And then you look at the name again. It's like, I don't know that one. Oh, okay.
It's like, oh, Jeffrey Rush. So he must have been Metalbeak. No, that was Joel Edgerton. Joel Edgerton was in this?
And?
Huh. I like Joel Edgerton. I had no idea he was even here.
Yeah. It's just so much of that just means that there's not a whole lot to talk about because other than the complaints we've had, it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate for a filmmaker who I think is powerful in his divisiveness. That to have something that's not divisive may be an issue. That's a weird way to think about it, but
no, I think you're spot on. Like I remember when I made my first short film and I got some reviews back that were just terrible, and my teacher told me, he's like, "Hey man, you pissed somebody off. You made them feel something. Even if it was a terrible movie, you still made somebody feel something, and you should feel good about that at least." It was the greatest way to say, like, hey, your movie didn't work for somebody, but in the best way possible. And this is that movie that gets like that response. And that is like, to me, that's such an insult to a film. And I don't mean it to be that mean this time, but like that is what, as a filmmaker, which I rarely am anymore, but whenever I do make films, that is the response that I'm trying to avoid. I'd rather have everybody get pitchforks to take my movie down than just forget about it.
Yeah, and with all the media out there, the interviews, the junkets, the articles, and all that when they talk to Zack Snyder, it sounds like he's very interested in making a movie to tell a story, and he wants to have a good time with it, and he's not trying to make a studio thing. It seems like watching all these, even if he's playing within the system, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
So then have something so paint by numbers, it's like, well, maybe he enjoyed it. Maybe it was a break from big, a calm before the storm. But he seems ambitious.
Yeah.
That guy. And you don't just put that on hold, even with your break. Like,
and you just
for better or worse. Yeah.
Just remember how much he was doing at the time. So at this time, he had 300 in 2006, which was like his big, like Dawn of the Dead was like his entry to the world of like filmmaking, if you will. Like he'd done stuff before that. That was his real first film. And then he did 300, which is like proof of concept. Like, oh no, he's awesome and he can pull it off. So from 300, he went from 300, and then 3 years later, he had Watchmen in 2009, Owls of Ga'Hoole in 2010, Sucker Punch in 2011, Man of Steel 2013. Like, he did not stop. It is a busy guy. So if he has one movie in there that's a little paint by numbers, not quite what we're jiving with, I think that's fine.
Yeah, it's a good ratio.
Yeah, it's a pretty good ratio. All right, let's move into favorite moments. I'll avoid the trailer moment, which is awesome, admittedly. If John doesn't pick that one, I will circle back to it. But my favorite moment in the movie is a joke, and it is a total dad joke, and it just cracked me up. And there are two characters we didn't really talk about much. There's this big owl and a little owl, and it's like this classic comedy trope of big guy, little guy. And they want to go on the adventure with Soren, and Soren's like, well, I guess you can come with. And he's like, good, because he's like, I can't take any more of this guy's this stuff. And he's like, I can't take any more of this guy's owl jokes. And he goes, why? They're a hoot. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. No, those jokes do work. I do appreciate that.
He has two that just works so well for me. That's one of them. And then what was your moment?
I think I'm trying to. Yeah, I'm just gonna go with the moment that you're hinting at, just because you kind of have to find that one because there are distinct moments. But the whole scene itself involving the echidna on the mountaintop and that presentation,
what a weird
and you
moment.
get past that. It is a weird moment, and that's where I was like, oh, that's what echidnas look like. Thanks a lot, Archie Comics and Sonic the Hedgehog, for steering me wrong all these years. But no, this mystical echidna, such a weird scene. But anyways, the joke about like all this stuff, and then you're halfway there. I was like, you hear that? We're halfway there. And I had never seen the trailer, so I didn't recognize that as a trailer moment until you mentioned it. But yeah, it's like, okay, there's some levity. This is distinct.
That's a solid joke. When you think you've flown so far, you're never going to make it. You're halfway there. What'd he say? We're halfway there. It's so good.
And then it cuts quickly to just they're in the shit. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay,
and then they
yeah.
make it. Yeah, I guess they were halfway there.
Yeah, no, but like to have that, we're halfway there, and then to have it be like a terrible windstorm, it's like that timing still tracks out as pretty funny.
Oh, yeah. it's there are things that work in the movie, just as a whole. Yeah. All right, double features this week. Might be a little tough. Why don't you go first? Do you have one locked and loaded by chance?
Let's see. I'm gonna have to cheat and say Mortal Engines. They're paired together. Just when you watch both of them, like, sorry, they're gonna feel very long. It's gonna be a very long double feature.
It's gonna be a long 3 hours. That's
right,
about it. Just about 3 hours, but it's gonna be a long 3 hours.
Yeah, everyone's gonna leave the theater in a daze, and I'll be cackling because, hey, I'm a trollish bastard. But like,
are you saying everyone will leave feeling moon blinked?
Probably. I mean, that would be my goal. All right, you will come back for another day of this same screening. Woohoo, more money. But just in the sense of, if anything, maybe it can jog our minds as to what's wrong with these. Like, I feel like we're just continuing to watch these. These things keep trickling in money because we don't know any better, and we're not like in a sort of like audience to shape what is sold. If we just could see these in a row, we could see their sins.
Sure.
On display.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. I'm gonna go a little different. I'm gonna go more like thematically than why do you exist, I guess. I'm gonna go with Secret of Nim. I kind of mentioned it earlier. It's still, animals, epic journey, is unafraid to scare kids. A lot of stuff that this thing does. I think they'd pair well together. I think Secret of Nim's a much better film, but it still ticks that box of me of like being for kids while not being afraid to talk down to them, which I think is really cool. I think it's important. I wish more movies did it. It's just that they're so few and far between, and when they are done, they're rarely done well. So it's just kind of tough. And Secret of Nim is always like my number one. Like, that is a great movie. It's scary as hell for kids, but it doesn't have to be either. Like, it's just such a beautiful film.
Yeah. How are you ordering them?
Oof. I'd probably go this one first. I usually try to end on the better note.
Okay, yeah. Because in my case, it wouldn't matter, but really.
Yeah, I think I'd go Gahools and then Nim, I think. So you're gonna,
yeah.
By the end of the day, you're basically gonna be speaking gibberish because you're gonna be hearing a lot of made up words all day. but
right. At least at the end of yours, like, you'll be amenable to the gibberish versus, mine, where like you're just gonna be like, oh, okay, no more talking, no more words.
I just want a beer and a nap.
Right.
All right. I think that pretty much does it for this one. This is it's the end of the normal Zack Snyder stuff, if you ever want to call anything normal of Zack Snyder, as we're about to dive deep into the crazy DC world of Zack Snyder, and I'm so here for this.
Yeah, and also examining just the response to it too, because at least with what we've watched so far, the criticisms against him, I would call them relatively harmless in terms of just you're dealing with people's taste. And in this regard, it's like, okay, he's divisive because not everyone likes 300. Not everyone liked Watchmen. Not everyone liked, not everyone liked what he was doing, but they didn't like what he was doing. It never felt like, against him, because with 300, it's Frank Miller who wrote it. So like people could suss him out a little bit better. The two of the filmmaker and writer.
And then you go with Watchmen, territory. But you go with Watchmen, it's like, oh, well, that's Alan Moore. It's impossible to translate anything Alan Moore's made. Like, that has like been the gold standard for a long time. If it's Alan Moore, it's not going to be a good movie. It's just impossible. So it's like, all right, so people gave him a pass on that one too. But oh boy, that changed when they got to Batman vs Superman.
Yeah, and maybe, and we'll see if we can get to it, because I feel like the scope of the upcoming episodes will put a strain on your editing time, because the discourse on him changed.
Yeah.
Completely.
And I will say this for the upcoming episodes, and if Matt, you're listening, this pertains to you too, because Matt Dykes will be joining us for the next two. The next two reviews, if you will be far less of a review of the movies, because we've already covered Batman vs Superman, not very well, to be totally fair, but we have done a full review on that movie. We've done a full review on the Whedon cut of Justice League, which granted just is a different movie, but I'm saying we have talked about these stories, we have covered them before, so I'm more interested in talking about the Zack Snyder of BVS and the Zack Snyder of Zack Snyder's Justice League, and like the world reacting to these movies. Like that's more what the next two episodes of our show is going to be kind of framed as. Like, yeah, we can get in the nitty gritties of like, and we probably will, like, why does the Martha scene actually work? Why is everyone wrong when they're just trying to jump on the one thing and it's so funny to make the same joke over and over? You're wrong. The scene works. We'll get into that stuff.
And the change of that over time too. Like,
yeah. I'm excited for the next two. We're going to do our best. Episodes might be a little over an hour, but they're going to have to stay around an hour or they're never going to get cut. They're never going to come out. Zack Snyder, I am not. And that's okay. Let's do a quick round of plugs, and then we'll say goodbye. Mine's pretty simple. Tune into HHpod.com for this show and every other show on the ATH network. Binge Buddies is taking a bit of a snooze till June when we come back with tentatively titled Who, What, When, Where, and Why We Do in the Shadows. That title might change. But in the meantime, not this past Monday, but this upcoming Monday, there will be episodes of either Damage Boost or Joel's podcast, Super GG Radio, and those will be on our feed for a little while until we come back with normal episodes. John, what about you? What you plugging?
Demon Days, like always, our actual play podcast that's still going strong. We're still in our bi-weekly schedule for the time being. I'm still trying to find fun ways to, or fun things to make Brian say in terms of the narrator and to get weird with it. But also, we're coming up on some big story stuff soon here, so we're building towards something, and I'm excited to share that with everyone. But just be patient.
Man, I was so proud of how the bartender turned out. Like, that voice took me a while to get down, but I thought it was pretty good. I like the way he said flame breath.
Yeah. I can my editor brain can kind of almost see, like, the Matrix code, the various takes and versions you may have done before you cut them to the version you give me.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of talking, and then like, all right, what would be the other lines being said here? Oh, it's good. I liked it. This past what episode would that have been? Would that have been the 79?
Yeah, we're just about to the 80, but okay. 79 is the last one. Yeah,
79 is my recommendation. Listen to at least my intro on that one. You should listen to the whole episodes. They're great. But if you're lost and you need to go back a whole bunch, just listen to the intro on 79, then go back, because I'm pretty proud of that one. That one I think I did pretty good on.
Yeah, it's always a treat to throw those in there, and always a treat to have that as a bookend.
Yeah, it's good. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. Tune in to the next 2 weeks where we go full nerd for Zack Snyder on BVS, the Ultimate Edition. In my case, the Ultimate Edition new 4K remaster, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. I might watch the black and white one for that. I might. I don't know. We'll see. Bye.
Justice is gray.
I hate the title so much. That's why I haven't watched it yet.
It's so Cristerio.
It really is.
See you later, bozos.